Hello, my name is Lorna, and today we're going to be learning how to make a needle-felted scene and or pin cushion. So the things you're going to need are a needle tool, scissors, some adhesive. The adhesive is optional. You could felt it together. These scissors are like shears. They work really good for getting really close to the needle felting. I have my regular scissors. I have a block of foam. This is just furniture cushion, and then the black mat that I have below it is actually recommended for needle felting. The cushion that I'm using is actually my old needle felting mat. I find that this black high density foam works a bit better. It doesn't pull as much, so I'm going to repurpose my old needle felting mat for a needle felting project. I also have a container. A lot of people use teacups. I don't drink tea, so I don't have teacups. But I do have this cute little planter that I got from a student a long time ago. I also have a piece of felt, which is optional, a piece of craft felt. You could just go straight in with the wool. You do need wool as well. And I'll go over the wool that you need later in the video. Right now we're just going to make the actual pin cushion part of this. And to do that, we're going to be sculpting our foam and then wrapping it in this wool. So I have a few pieces of the foam shoved down into this planter because it's pretty deep. You might be able to get away with just one block of foam. So I want to round out my foam. And so I'm going to do that by first taking this rectangle and turning it into more of an oval shape. It is squishy, so it's going to be very forgiving on fit. I don't need to make sure that it's going to fit perfectly. I actually want it to be a little bit larger than the circumference of my container so that it will squish in so that I don't have to glue it in. You could glue it in when it's all done if you would like. I'm not sure if I'm going to want to use this planter for a pin cushion for its entire lifespan, so I'm not doing any permanent changes to this planter. So I'm just taking my scissors and cutting off large bits here. You can actually reuse some of these large bits for little houses and trees and things and just cover them in wool, which is pretty fun. So I am just shaping the top of this with small snips. I'm not being very precise with trying to get it to look very smooth. You don't need to be perfect here because it is going to be covered with a sheet of the felt. If you are using directly wool onto this, then you would want to perfect it and smooth it a little bit more because the wool is going to have less of a cushion to separate it from the cushion. Using a sheet of felt, I find, also helps the wool to stick to the felting mat. This felting mat is not supposed to be feltable, but I actually found that it is significantly feltable, so that's why I am repurposing it. If you're interested in this planter, here's some information. I have no idea where it came from. Like I said, it was a gift. So I've put my chunk into my planter, and now I'm going to shape it a little bit more so that it goes kind of with the flow of this planter. I do want it to be kind of domed and like its own little world stuffed into this little tree trunk. So I'm not going to slope it or anything like that, but the shape that you do is up to you. So I'm going to finish trimming this and I'll get back to you with the next step. So I want to add a water feature into my piece. And I'm going to do that by just carving out a groove. And this groove is going to make it so that my water that I'm going to be adding looks lower than the surrounding hills or bank, whatever you want to call it. So I'm just taking these shear style scissors and I am snipping a almost triangular groove in. You could make your river wider. You could make it take up the majority of the piece and just have a little bit of bank on the sides. You could sculpt in boulders and hills and rocks into this in the same way. So your landscape is up to you. And I'm kind of stretching the foam with my fingers and pulling it apart, just so I can get a little bit deeper. You can cut at a 45-degree angle as well to make it more of a gentle incline into the water as opposed to like a steep drop off into the water. And that's what I'm doing here, is I'm just cutting at an angle. So now I'm going to wrap my foam. So I have here my piece of craft felt. This is 100% wool, but you can use any craft felt that you have. I was able to get this in just a large sheet. That's why I have this. And any color, this is just what I have on hand. So I'm going to wrap it around, and I want to make sure that as I'm wrapping, I don't have a lot of bunching on one particular side. So I'm going to flip it over and needle felt this wool together. If you're using a stiffened felt or a craft felt that is a little bit more porous, this part might be a little bit difficult to get to stick. That's okay. It will stay together when you put it in, or you can use some adhesive to get this to stick, like some hot glue or some fabric glue. So I'm just going to go around and pleat this around the sides. Again, I'm not being very precise because I'm just going to put this part into my planter. You're not going to see it. I just want to make sure that all of the sides are not bulging out. When you add your wool on top of this, it will also help it adhere to the mat as well. If you do any flat felting, sometimes if you're felting for a long time and you forget to lift your wool, it will get stuck to your mat. That's similar concept to what we're doing here, is we're felting it to our mat. We do have a bridge of this wool here, but eventually the wool will get through this felt and into the foam. So that will help the felt stick as well. So as I put it in there, I want to make sure that I'm going over my groove just to get that in there ahead of time before I lay in my color. So the colors of wool that I'm using today are various shades of green. I have some red, some white, and some brown. But the colors of wool that you use really depend on the features that you want. I'm going to show you how to needle felt trees and mushrooms, which are pretty much the same thing in different sizes. So I'm going to show you a mushroom and then time lapse the trees because it's very similar technique. So for this part, I'm just laying on some green. I have this variegated dyed merino wool from Rumpelstiltskin, and it has these really nice, like, more olive greens and lime greens, and I really like the difference because it's going to add some dimension to it. So I'm going to take it out to felt it, otherwise my needle would be hitting my planter the entire time. That, and I can wrap the excess wool around the bottom to help secure it into place. So I'm just going to go back and forth over this until I feel like it is secure. The amount of felting that you do here is up to you. You can get it really tightly felted. I like more of a whimsical, fluffy look, so that's what I'm going to go with. But the longer you continue to poke and the longer you continue to felt, the smoother and less bumpy, less fuzzy it's going to get. For my result, I spent about 30 minutes felting this piece. So now that it's in and I've gone around all of my edges to make sure that it fits the way that I want, I'm going to work on some mushrooms. So the mushrooms and the trees are the same thing. It's going to be a stalk with a cone-shaped lid. So I'm just going to take a piece of white wool and I'm going to roll it into the shape that I want. And in that case, it's going to be a cylinder. So I'm just holding one end and rotating. And you want to rotate pretty frequently when you're trying to get something rounded. If you rotate, but only rotate exactly, so say I have it one direction and I do a full 45-degree turn, it's going to become square. So you want to make sure you're doing a little less than a quarter turn every time. And if you do see that edges are starting to form or corners are starting to form, you felt those down. So you'll see I kind of roll it, but very slowly while I am turning. I don't flip it. If you flip it, it's going to flatten out. So for the top here, I've just made like a cinnamon roll and I am felting that straight into my mat. You'll see when I pick it up, there's a lot of fibers that go directly into my mat, and that's okay. So to attach, I'm just going to put my white piece on and felt around. And you'll see there's some pieces coming out. Just gonna felt that in a little bit more. It's a very simple technique. So you can go ahead and felt the edges directly to your mushroom to clean those up a bit. And that's what's going to give it its cone shape. You don't really need to do much with these. So you take a disc and you put it on top of your cylinder. And when the white part is in, the stalk is in the cap, it's a lot easier to attach it and to shape it because you have something to hold on to. So I recommend getting a loose felting on your cap, attaching it, and then continuing to shape because you have more surface area to hold. So I'm just taking my shears and I am cleaning up all of the fuzzy bits. This is optional. You could continue to felt and you would felt these in. When something is so small, I find that you end up just poking all the way through to the other side and causing more of the threads to go directly through and needing to trim anyways. If you felt it tightly enough, you will not jeopardize the structure by giving it a cut. So I'm going to take my needle tool and I'm going to poke down into the stalk because I'm going to add a pin. I'm adding a pin into my pieces so that I can move them around later on because this is a pin cushion, but it's also so that I can redesign it every day if I want. So for the spots on my mushroom cap, I'm just taking a little bit of white and I'm poking towards the center and then dragging the rest of the white towards the center. And when you give the extra hairs a good trim, it's nice and flat. You need a little bit more wool than you would think for this part, and that's because it gets kind of sucked into the red cap. And I'm being careful not to poke all the way through to the other side because I don't want white poking through the red. So I'm doing shallow pokes that are effective enough to go into the red, but not too deep to go all the way through. And if you'll notice, I'm not making perfect little balls before putting this on. All I'm doing is putting a chunk on and then poking towards the center of that chunk, dragging my ends in and then giving it a trim. And you can add as many spots as you want. You could add stripes, you can add whatever you want to this part. I also really like to add these details before I finished fully felting the red part. And that's due to the fact that when you add things to it, can kind of sink in and you need to felt the red around it so that they all match. Otherwise, you have kind of indents and holes. When you're doing the trees, it's very similar to this. All right, so I have this glue. It's 527. It's a multi-use glue. You can use anything from Elmer's. I like this because it's quick and it's an industrial adhesive. You don't want to get it on your foam because it will eat through your foam. So make sure you're protecting your foam or you move your foam out of the way. You don't want to get it on your table, your work surface. I'm just using a piece of paper. Putting a little bit on the end of the pin and then stuffing it into the end of my mushroom and pressing down. So I'm going to repeat this for 2 more mushrooms. This time adding a little bit of yellow to the stalk, to almost like dirt. Add my pin, and then for the trees, I'm going to do the same process, only I'm going to do it slightly larger. So I'm making a larger stalk and a larger cap, and in brown and green, of course. And you can mix your green wool with other greens so that you have more dimension. Like you could add a darker green in with this, and that would look really cool. But because I have such variation in my grass, I don't really want that much in my trees. And I'm going to repeat that again. I'm doing 2 trees, 2 mushrooms. You can add little houses and animals and things like that if you would like as well. The amount of things that you add into your landscape is up to you, and there are so many great things that you can add. So after I have completed all of my pieces, it's time to assemble. So I have all of my pieces, 2 trees, 3 mushrooms, and here is the final product. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.